Thank you to the organizer for giving us this opportunity to discuss issues among different groups of population. Today, I'd like to briefly present the main result of my 3 studies in which I look at the skills level of different pockets of population. To be prepared for the labor market changes that has been discussed already, it's important to ensure that all individuals are equipped with sufficient level of skills to be able to participate in the labor market, and no one should be left behind. By skills, I mean fundamental skills such as literacy and numeracy. These information processing skills are essential for on-the-job performance. They facilitate the application of skills and improve the labor market outcomes. However, according to the OECD surveys on adult skills, not only there are a skills gap between different population groups such as immigrants and non-immigrants and indigenous and non-indigenous, but also Canada's working age population has experienced a decline in adult skills. Let me start with understanding a skills decline among Canadian-born population. Even though more Canadian obtain a post-secondary education over time. I look at two possible explanations for this skills decline: aging effect and generational differences. Aging effect happens when individuals obtain lower test scores as they age, and generational differences relate to when individuals in the same age group obtain different results at different points in time. The data shows that individuals' skills level decline with age, and more importantly, the rate of skills depreciation is larger among older workers. Given that the share of older people has increased over time, an aging population will therefore drag down average performance. These results highlight the importance of obtaining the highest possible skills as early as possible, since skills start declining upon individuals departing schools. Factors that may cause an age-related skills decline are a lack of further investment in learning and training, or not applying existing skills frequently enough before the aging effect begins. Generational difference is another possible explanation for a skills decline. Comparing skills results between 2003 and 2012 shows individuals aged 25 to 34 also obtain lower scores in literacy and numeracy. About a decade later. Although skills decline for all levels of education, the drop were substantially larger among those without a university degree. One potential explanation for the lower skills level of equally educated adults over generations can be differing education quality. Lowering the admission requirements for post-secondary education can be another factor that contributes to declining skills. Using regression analysis, taking into account differences in characteristics of participants, both aging and generational differences largely contribute to this skills decline in Canada. In particular, more recent generations have lower literacy skills than past generations. Average literacy scores of low achievers and low educated individuals also decline at a faster rate than others among more recent generations and as they age. In addition to seniors and low educated individuals, immigrants also do not perform well in literacy skills. Immigrants come to Canada with different set of skills. Higher literacy skills make immigrants more able to use their full set of skills and accelerate immigrants' labor market integration. However, there is a large literacy gap between immigrants and non-immigrants in Canada. Immigrants' language background is a major factor that affects a skills gap between immigrants and non-immigrants. Because literacy results can capture language abilities since these tests are administered in an official language of the host country. Immigrants without English or French as a mother tongue in the case of Canada would naturally be expected to perform lower on literacy exams than those who have a greater background in any of these official languages. In fact, literacy score gaps significantly reduced after screening for differences in language background. Another important factor that impacts the skills gap between immigrants and non-immigrants is education. Controlling for education significantly increased the skills gap. This is because greater proportion of immigrants relative to non-immigrants have higher educational attainment. Although higher levels of education translate into greater skills for both immigrants and non-immigrants, there is a persistent literacy skills gap between immigrants and non-immigrants across all levels of education, including university-educated immigrants. But immigrants who obtain their highest level of education in Canada perform better than those who receive degrees in all other countries, regardless of their language background. There are also remarkable variations in literacy gap between immigrants and non-immigrants by immigration program. Immigrants are admitted under 4 major categories: economic or point system, family, refugees, and others. The literacy gap is much higher for refugee and family class immigrants, where language and education are not selection factors for immigration. Another group of population with low levels of skills are Indigenous people. The poor performance of Indigenous people relative to non-Indigenous Canadian is not surprising, since only 10% of Indigenous Canadians held a university degree compared to 22% of non-Indigenous Canadians. Among Indigenous group, Inuit have the worst outcome. Only 4% of those are they held a university degree. A skills gap between off-reserve Indigenous people, particularly First Nation and Inuit, and non-Indigenous Canadian are wide among those without the highest school education. Although the gap in literacy skills between Indigenous and non-Indigenous populations shrink with more education, both First Nation and Inuit experience large skills gap at any education level. Looking at the factors that explains the gap, differences in education levels and characteristics of the home environment are able to explain the largest share of the gap. This is particularly true for Métis. This result basically shows if Indigenous have on average the same level of education as non-Indigenous. For example, 41% of the gap would be explained for all Indigenous. However, for for First Nation and Inuit, the large proportion of the gap can be explained by the factors such as education, region of residence, work experience, and the factors that I could control for. My recommendations to improve a skills outcome of a disadvantaged population group falls into 3 categories. Ensuring people complete each level of their education with the highest possible skills level by focusing on education quality is the best strategy to limit age-related skills and age-related skills decline, basically. Other potential policies to tackle this decline include encouraging active learning and offering adult training opportunities for those who are at higher risk of skills depreciation, such as seniors. Policymakers also need to review the targeted on-the-job training programs to ensure the effectiveness of this program in slowing the skills decline as people age. To reduce immigrant skills gap, in addition to education, the focus should be around language ability and post-immigration language training, especially for newcomers. In regards to indigenous people, attention should be given to improving skills development during primary and secondary education. To do this, more data should be collected to understand the challenges that indigenous students are facing. Well-designed training opportunities should be provided for both unemployed and employed indigenous people. This is because indigenous people experience a higher unemployment rate compared to non-indigenous individuals. This policy would help develop a more skilled workforce and would drive broader prosperity and economic growth with positive social impact. Thank you for attention. I look forward to your questions.